On the chilly evening of December 1st, 1955, on a busy street in the capital of Alabama, a 42-year-old woman boarded a city bus to return home after a long day of work. She took a seat near the middle, just behind the front section. On the next stop, more passengers got on. When every seat in the front section was taken, the bus driver ordered a woman and two other passengers in the middle row to stand up so a man could sit. Other two passengers obeyed while the woman refused to give up her seat. She was arrested and fined $10 plus $4 in court fees. You may think, what a strange story, how could anyone be arrested for refusing to give up a seat? But I deliberately hidden one important detail. She was an African American, and by city ordinance, public transport in the state of Alabama was still segregated in 1955. But this episode is not gonna be about social justice or civil rights. Today we will take a look at a broader perspective of what is normality, how we consider of what is normal and what's not, who sets the rules of what is acceptable and what's radical or unthinkable, how normality changes, and who could use it. Also, we're gonna need to boil some frogs. A lot of questions, so let's get some answers. First of all, I like to start from normality. And it's not about the definition but more of how we perceive the reality and understand of what is normal and what's not. And to answer that, we need to dive into psychology and sociology. By nature, human beings are quite lazy and they prefer doing as little thinking as possible. Therefore, in order to understand and respond to events without using all the brain power, we use something called framing. So, what is framing? Every time we make some new previously unknown interaction, our brain analyzes it and tries to find some pattern. So next time the same type of interaction occurs, instead of thinking how to respond, our brain will use an already saved pattern, making a response quicker and more efficient. For example, we could easily recognize a blink, which is a physical frame, and a wink, which is a social frame and conveys different meaning in a social interaction. Using those frames doesn't require much efforts or extensive thinking, it just works automatically, giving us an appropriate response. Those frames provide a quick and easy way to process information, but also this could lead to some evident problems. We create frames that form our perception of reality through social and cultural influences. As the result, understanding of what is normal is gonna be different depending on influences and sources we use to create our frames. I think you've heard the term a filter bubble. That's the problem with nowadays search engines and algorithm-based social media. When you search for something, you've likely noticed that your suggested page or newsfeed starts recommending you more content based on your searches. If you continue to watch and like this content, the algorithm will start recommending you the same type of content even more, locking you in kind of information vacuum where all the content revolves around your searches and your interests. While this benefits social media platforms for keeping you engaged for as long as possible, ultimately generating more ad revenue, it may be not the best situation for you. Living in a filter bubble creates a biased view of reality, because you no longer see the whole picture, but only part of it you like, blocking out everything else you don't like or don't support. Framing uses biases and patterns to make recognition and response to situation easier, faster, and more efficient. And this is very important in information-driven world where the volume of information grows exponentially and we need to interact with it and filter it somehow. It helps us not to go crazy because of overflow of information we cannot comprehend and process physically. But also, it was important for survival in ancient times where the swift recognition of a threat could mean the difference between life and death. What's interesting, we still have those abilities and using them without much realizing it. How much time do you think you need to make a first impression of a person? Maybe 5 minutes, or a minute, or even a few seconds is gonna be enough. A research at Princeton University shows that we could quite accurately identify a person, understand and determine if we could trust them, and form our first impression in just 100 milliseconds. That's actually faster than a blink of an eye, which takes usually 150 milliseconds. Alright, so now we have some idea of normality and how we perceive it, but how it changes. It turns out that we have quite a detailed concept of this, and it's called an Overton window. To better understand this notion, let's consider an example, an alcoholic beverages control and prohibition enacted by the 18th Amendment from 1920 to 1933. Let's imagine a list of degrees of acceptance ranging from unthinkable on both edges to policy in the center. On the edges, we always have something radical. It's either the full control or no control at all. All the acceptable choices lay in the middle part of the spectrum. That's a common sense that everyone agrees on. However, the middle section is not the only one acceptable. It's usually a range or a window of choices. This window can move towards more restricted or more liberal side. It not only can move along the spectrum but also expand, opening new possibilities or shrink down, giving a fewer choices. These movements of window change the norms of reality, also known as creeping normality. Creeping normality, also called gradualism, is the process by which major change could be accepted as normal if it happens slowly through small, often unnoticeable increments of change. This process is usually described by an apologue, the boiling frog. The premise is that if a frog is put suddenly into boiling water, it will jump out, but if the frog is put into tepid water, which is then brought to a boil slowly, it will not perceive the danger and will be cooked to death. This story is often used as a metaphor for unwillingness people to react to threats that arise gradually rather than suddenly. And you may ask yourself, who could benefit from an Overton window? As we are talking about policies and laws, you may have probably guessed it, those are politicians. For them, Overton window is more than just a concept, it's the difference between winning and losing, being accepted or rejected. If you're talking about some extreme concepts but your electorate is more towards traditional views, you will probably not resonate with them and lose the election by a lot, like Herbert Hoover did in US president election in 1932. Franklin Roosevelt won in almost every state, and one of his promises was to repeal the 18th Amendment, which was highly accepted after more than 10 years of restrictions. Regarding the woman from the story at the beginning, her name was Rosa Parks. Her refusal to give up a seat led to a series of events known as the Montgomery bus boycott that lasted for 381 days and was ended by US Supreme Court that upheld lower court's decision that any segregation law violates the 14th Amendment to the US Constitution that guarantees all the citizens, regardless of race, equal rights and equal protection under state and federal laws. Montgomery's buses were integrated on December 21, 1956, and the boycott has ended. But still, it was the long process to accept the changes, as those were sudden. It's like a frog thrown into a boiling water and it wants to jump out of it. So this is it for today. Thank you for watching this episode and stay curious about the science. Don't forget about likes and subscriptions, and I will catch you in the next episode. Goodbye.